mountains are pretty freaking cool.
Stalactite has to hold on tight to the ceiling, it doesn't fall down. And then which formations are coming? Stalagmites, that was a G, and the ground of stalagmite might one day reach up, touch the ceiling, or actually might one day reach up, meet up with its counterpart stalactite, because these are actually growing in pairs. So they're eventually going to meet up somewhere in the middle. And what might we call them when they do that? What do we call them? Those who they touch the formations, especially people wearing gray t-shirts or columns. In other cases, these formations come flowing down towards us themselves. Once standing up, right there. So what do you think caused that to fall? Not an earthquake. How long ago do you think that happened? There's that layering. The coloration of these striations you can see on the side there where it does not have that coloring. What you see over here, it is called ribbon rock, not cave lake. So, here. So with this stuff, you have some hydrostatic pressure pushing water out of the pores of the rock. So slowly that it's never going to drip. Starting you push that and then evaporate, push that and evaporate. Depositing little domes of calcite until eventually you get some weird and globulous formations called globulates. Or up there, little tiny guys going all sorts of weird directions. Those are called helictites. Thing is almost 5 feet long. That thing, right up there, probably weighs around 800 pounds. Is being held on something called So, you know, you guys, everyone defines necessary states, you know, feet choice. Okay. So, everyone ready? Now let's confirm that's that all sources of artificial light are clean. Go back up Peg Leg Hill. Peg Leg Hill is a stairs about 63 stairs on the 19th step. We are 5,280 feet above sea level. That's what's known as. And right here is our mile high stair, folks. Mile high right there.
Bruh, hold on.
Here, I want you to stop. Right here. On the step. Just stick over here.
Here, wait. Not.
All right, this is the bonanza. Some people say this is the most. He was out in the street talking to his neighbor, and the light, they had a lamp in the living room, and the lamp started to flicker off and on and off and on, and he thought, oh boy, this is an old house. I better go check that lamp because I'd hate to burn the place down because my lamp's not light. So he went in to check the lamp that was flickering, and he discovered that there was no bulb in it. Now, if you walk through that door under the enclosed porch there, go straight ahead. The back part of the house is a kitchen area. At the very end, there's a lady was in the kitchen at the microwave, and she saw something out of the corner of her eye. And she turned to look, and something white had come down the stairs and was standing on the landing, and it kept going behind her straight and come out this door again. That same couple had a friend stop for the night. They gave him one of the upstairs bedrooms. The next morning, he said to the two people, he said, I didn't know you had a dog. And they said, well, we don't. And he said, well, there was a dog barking and growling and running up and down their stairs all night long. Other people have said that they'll hear footsteps on the landing, they hear creaking, doorknobs turn in that house as well. And there's something in that house that doesn't like pictures. They don't like to stay on the wall. If you slam a door and a picture falls because of a vibration, it'll fall with a crash. These pictures don't do that. It's like something looks at it and says, gee, I don't like that, and takes it off the wall and sets it down. It is for rent. What to look for, so I'm not sure. Wife Virginia came to Virginia City. They came in September of 1863. They had a dairy farm about 6 miles over the hill that way. And when Jack was sober, he was a really great guy. He was a good neighbor. People liked him. He was friendly. He was thoughtful. He was generous. He was considerate. But Jack had a drinking problem. And when he drank too much, he was like a Jekyll and Hyde personality. He was a mean drunk. He'd insult the ladies. He'd ride his horse into saloons. He would demand goods and services from people. And if you walk into my establishment, you're drunk and you have a gun on your hip, you can have whatever you want, just take it. Don't bother my establishment. That's kind of how the townspeople treated him. When Jack would sober up, he'd come back, he'd apologize, he'd make amends, he'd pay for his damages, and everything was fine until he went on his next drunk. Well, Jack had some really good friends who were vigilantes, but he also had some enemies who were vigilantes as well. In March of 1864, Jack went on a 2-day drunk with his good friend Bill Fairweather, who was one of the 6 men who discovered gold here in Alder Gulch. The 2 of them started at a show. They were already drunk, but they went to a show. They insulted the actors and actresses. They threw unmentionables. They got ugly and mean. They started up and down the street, in and out of saloons. They liked to shoot all the glass they could find. Jack's vigilante friends told him to get out of town, let everything blow over and people forget about it. Bill Fairweather listened. He got on his horse and left town. Jack didn't listen. He continued to drink. Jack's vigilante enemies on the 2nd day picked him up. They took him down this street and they hung him. Before they hung him, however, Jack's friends ran to get Virginia, his wife, because Virginia could outshoot, outsmoke, outride, outfight, outcuss just about any man in Montana territories. Most of the men were afraid of her, and Jack's friends figured if Virginia showed up, she'd save Jack from all this nonsense. Well, she came tearing down over the hill on her horse to rescue Jack, but he was already dead. Virginia was a little bit annoyed, to say the least. She decided that his friends had betrayed him, and they probably had, because if you think about it, Jack was drunk and disorderly. That's a misdemeanor. That's not a hanging offense. Jack is the only man we know of in Montana territories that was hung for a misdemeanor. So Virginia was angry. She decided there was no way she was going to bury Jack in Virginia City. It was March. You couldn't have put a pick in the ground if you wanted to because things were frozen solid. The stagecoach wouldn't run again till probably June, depending on how long it took the snows to melt and the trails to open back up. So Virginia rented this house. She got a zinc coffin. She filled it with whiskey, and she pickled Jack for 3 months until she could send him to Salt Lake City for burial. I couldn't make this up. I mean, this is true. He is buried in Salt Lake City. And this is the house this year that we're getting a lot of pictures. This window over here, I've seen what looks like a man in a duster and a Stetson hat. About a month ago, I had 2 ladies on this tour. They both took a picture at the front door, and they both got the same face in the picture, looking out the window frame from a slightly different angle. People have told me that they get over to the rose bushes and it feels like something shoving them backwards. Other people have told me that they get close and something tells them to go away. Last year on this tour, we were standing here and I was talking, and something that looked to me like a black fuzzy softball all of a sudden was hovering above our heads. I have no idea what it was. It just hung there maybe 6-7 seconds and then it was gone. No idea where it was, what it came from, where it went. You can take pictures here if you want. It's privately owned, but nobody lives here. I had a fellow a couple weeks ago that he held up his camera to take a picture, and 3 blobs like orbs were diving right at him, and I mean he flinched because he thought, and he snapped his picture, he got one of the orbs, he didn't get all 3 of them. And it's a strange picture, it's got a tail on it. This Bill Fairweather, that's what he's good drinking about. Bill died a natural death, but he's not. The guys that were going to rid the town of the criminal element, the road agents were the supposed bad guys that the vigilantes hung. The vigilantes, of course, had no legal authority to behave the way they did. They took it upon themselves to decide who was innocent and who was guilty. Everybody they hung, not one of them had a fair trial, not one of them had any trial at all. This was Civil War era. We had Northerners here, we had Southerners here. It turns out that a lot of the vigilantes were Northern Republicans. A lot of the supposed road agents, the bad guys that they hung, were Southern Democrats. Does any of this sound at all familiar? Nothing ever changes. And basically it was a power struggle because there was a lot of gold here. It was determined this gold would not fall into Southern hands, and it did not. The very first person that the vigilantes hung was Sheriff Plummer, who was a very popular Southern Democrat and who planned to run for the same office as Wilbur Sanders, who was a Northern Republican and one of the gentlemen that founded the Alder Gulch vigilante movement. We're going to go in here. Before we go in here, I want to tell you a little bit about what's happened to some of the people in here. People have been pinched, their hair has been pulled, they've been shoved. I had a lady that was walking out that tripped, and she said, oh, there was a big stick there, but there's nothing on the floor, so I'm not sure what it was that tripped her. People have told me it feels to them like they're standing on a rocking boat, and they're almost nauseous. We've seen white somethings that are floating in there and go out through the wall. Your cameras may behave not properly in here. People will get totally black pictures and they'll come back out and their camera works, they go back in and something happens, they can't take pictures. Before we go in here, I will tell you what happened to a man on this walk 2 years ago. When we left the bale of hay, he told me that he did not believe in ghosts, but his family wanted to take this walk and he wanted to come along with his family. And I said, that's fine, you don't have to believe in ghosts. Come, have a good time, hopefully learn something. Well, he was talking and cheerful the whole way till we got to this building. We went in here, we come back out. He didn't say another word to me for the whole rest of the tour. And I thought, oh well, he's just gotten bored and he wants it to be over with. Well, at the end of the tour, he told me what happened to him in this building. He said he went in and he was leaning up against the wall and he was prepared to snicker and smirk and chuckle at all the people that thought they felt something or heard something. And he felt something on the back of his neck. And he thought it was a bug, so he just flicked it away. And then he felt it again, only that time he felt the 4 fingers at the back and the thumb at his throat. Now with that, we're going to go in here. Here's what it looked like. It was just the 4 bare outside walls and the beam through the center. This wall wasn't here, that back wall wasn't here. It was basically just the skeleton of a building. They hung all 5 of them on that beam right there. And right there is a rope burn. The unfortunate man on that end of the rope struggled and squirmed for a while and left that mark. We know for a fact that Clubfoot George, this fella here, was an innocent man. We're pretty sure that Jack Gallagher was innocent as well. His only crime was he happened to be Sheriff Plummer's deputy. And you can see the armed guards in front because there were people in Virginia City that thought maybe these guys should be allowed a fair trial. If they weren't given one, they were hung up. Run up after they were dead, they laid in the street for a while, and then they got buried up in the Go ahead and take pictures. Move so that give everybody a chance that wants to come in. And this will be open in the morning, if you're still here. And she started telling her neighbors that she would see this bloody apparition in the bathroom. And the neighbors thought, yeah, sure, right, And they started calling her Loose Wheel Lucille. Well, 30 years later, in the 70s, a couple bought this house. And they wanted to get it on the historic register, which they did, because there's the plaque. But in order to get a house on the historic register, it has to be researched and authenticate it. Somebody has to look at this house and make sure that it's what it's supposed to be. It was built when it was supposed to be built, and that it meets the criteria for historic registration. A lady named Ellen Baumler in Helena, who works for the Heritage Commission, did the research on this house, and she discovered that in 1900, a Frank and Amanda McKean lived here. Frank worked at the Anaconda Hotel, which is now the Fairweather Inn. And in 1919, this would have been 30, 40 years before Lucille, Frank died during the influenza epidemic. Amanda was devastated. She couldn't get over her depression. She went to Butte. She bought a gun, and she came home and shot and killed herself in the bathroom. So maybe Lucille wasn't quite as crazy as her neighbors thought she was. I know the lady that owns this house. She told me that in the 90s, she raised 2 sons here, and her sons never liked the bathroom. Even as teenagers, they went in and out. That was it, because they always felt totally uncomfortable in that bathroom. But I think what really clinched it for me was this house. For this house was last year on this tour, I had a couple, and they always stood just a little bit aloof from everybody else. And I thought, that's fine, they just want their space. Well, at the end of the walk, the gentleman told me what happened to him here. He told me that he was a Texas Ranger. He and his wife were up here on vacation, but as a police officer, he always carried a weapon with him, and he did have a gun with him that night. That's one reason he and his wife always stood a little apart, because he was very cognizant of who was in his perimeter, because he's responsible, of course, for that gun. He said he and his wife were standing apart. Nothing was there. He was here, his gun was here, his wife was there. And before I said anything at all about Amanda shooting herself in the bathroom, he told me that he felt something fumbling for his gun. I can't add to that. Back at Jackson Street again. This was the house the lightning splitter was on. This road dead ends at the house here, but this hills up to the very top. You can walk up there if you want. This area down here was the Chinese section. Here, 6 steps walking across the living room. Something would rap on the table. His wife saw an old man all the time, and whoever it was or whatever it was that they shared that house with made it. Afternoon it collapsed again, so they decided they weren't going to rent the room that night to let whatever energy was in the rest of the day. People that have stayed in room 10 have been on my walk, and they've told me that it sounds like somebody's walking up on the roof. Other people have told me it sounds like somebody or something is walking around the bed. Things fall off the dresser. Contents of suitcases get rearranged. Flashlights will go off and on. One man told me that he and his wife were sleeping there. His wife slept through the whole thing. Come down to the basement. She thought it was her husband, so she didn't think too much about it. She was bent over the dryer pulling out sheets, and something pinched her in the butt. So she assumed it was her husband, so she turned around to give him the devil, except nobody was there. I had a lady that was staying in one of these rooms, I'm not sure which room, but it was on this section in here. She told me it sounded like bowling balls in the basement, and it did used to be a 1-lane bowling alley. There was a fellow on my walk that told me they had a room by the balcony on the 2nd floor. He couldn't remember which number it was, but he said he and his wife went to bed that night, and he was very anal about always making sure that he had the chain on the door. And he knows that he put the chain on the door. They went to bed. Something woke them up about 2 o'clock in the morning. They got up to look because they heard scuffling at the door, and the chain had been undone from the door. The rest of the night, it sounded like wings fluttering around them all night long. He said he would never ever again stay in the Fairweather. I don't want to say that to them. It is a nice place. I think it was room 12. There was a couple staying in room 12. They went down to tell the desk clerk that she needed to tell the occupants in the next room to be quiet because the occupants were making so much noise. The desk clerk told them that room beside them was not rented. So they went back upstairs. The next morning they came down to complain. They said they wanted their money back because the clerk had lied, and definitely there were people in the room beside them. The clerk took the key, took them upstairs, unlocked the door, and proved to them that the room had been empty all night long. So, I don't know. You should stay there, try a room, see what happens. Plot, they could look down the street. This was the business street. Jackson was the main street in and out of town. So they could sit up there. They knew who was coming, who was going, and who was here. I had a gentleman on this walk last year that had a thermal imaging camera, and he took a picture up here, and I couldn't read it because I don't know what I'm looking at with thermal imaging, but he told me there were heat spots up there where there should never have been heat spots, and it showed up on his camera. Some were used as storage areas for businesses, but I have had psychics on this tour, different psychics, different tours, different times, and they all tell me basically the same thing. They tell me that that's a very dark area. Some of them feel that there were women, children held down there against their will, and that's why it emanates such a dark energy. Okay, this is the Dance and Stewart building. Clubfoot George Lane, one of the 5 men that was hung up in the Hangman building, and one man that we know was an innocent man, had a shop in here. The morning they hung him, he was coming in here to work. They come down, grabbed him, took him up there, and hung him. So every time I'm having a bad day at work, I think of Clubfoot George, and I think at least nobody's going to come and haul me away and hang me. So what am I complaining about? That's about the end of the tour. I do have a poem to read to you that was written by a local man for the Ghost Walk. It's about Bill Fairweather, and if you remember, Bill Fairweather was one of the 6 gentlemen that discovered gold here in Alder Gulch. Also Jack Slade's good drinking buddy. Bill made a fortune here. He went to California, where he managed to lose it all. He came back to Virginia City, and he did die here. He is buried out in Veterans Cemetery at the far end of town. So this is called The Ghost of Bill Fairweather Walks in the Night, written by Dick Gittes for the Ghost Walk. Oh, how the night wind howled and moaned, and all the old buildings creaked and groaned. The rain came down, and lightning flashed. The gutters ran full, and thunder crashed. There was a glow from inside an abandoned saloon. A piano tinkled, and a chorus girl crooned. But no living thing is ever in sight when the ghost of Bill Fairweather walks in the night. Dance hall girls and miners are having theirselves a bash. Beneath the floorboards, rats are rifling through the trash. The piano sounds on in violent discord. Heavy footsteps sound on the rotten boardwalk boards. Every living eye is averted in dread of this fearful apparition of the walking dead. The town stays empty, no living thing in sight, when the ghost of Bill Fairweather walks in the night. A giant figure appears and looks all around. It stops under a sagging porch to survey the town. Then it speaks. Well, looky there, by hell. They gave my name to that there hotel. Then an evil laugh rends the stormy gloom. I think I'll go over there and take myself a room. So if that's where you're staying, keep your doors locked tight when the ghost of Bill Fairweather walks in the night. That's the end of the tour. Good evening.
Was there ever a fire that took
No.
any of these?
No,
That's
we never
unusual.
had one like Helena had a couple. We've had some individual. VC Cafe isn't original. It's 1915 because it burned, but nothing beside it burned. Yeah. bale of hay had a fire a couple years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.